oh boy, I'm glad you stuck with me so far because this next part gets even better. So we're going to use the color selection masking tool in this next step. We're going to turn on our green paint again, our color overlay in this brilliant green. And again, we come to the Add Mask icon, click on it, it brings up a mask. I'm going to invert the mask. And the next tool we're going to use is color selection. But let me take this as an opportunity to tell you that if you want to be as successful as you can with masking, and you have an artificial situation, such as using a model and wanting to be able to replace the background, you've heard of green screen. So you would have a fairly consistent background, either in color or brilliance perhaps, and that color or luminance would contrast with your subject. And your subject wouldn't have fine flyaway hair or a veil or something like that. That makes things a lot harder, but not to worry, there are some tricks to dealing with that. It is a very more advanced part of this that hopefully we'll be able to get into as well if I don't forget. So here we go with the color selection tool. Let's say I had a cardinal, this red, and we want to isolate that red, and perhaps that cardinal's against a green fir bough with a brown branch and some snow perhaps. Beautiful sounding. How do we isolate the cardinal and be able to substitute a background? Click on the color selection thing. We're going to click on this, but we have to also convert what we're going to do to white, right? So if we do black, it doesn't look right. We click on the red, and then we click on white. And you can see that it's selected things that are pretty wide in range of color. Doesn't look too good now, right? But we can use the sliders down below to change the range of colors. So we're close to the red here. There's red at both ends, by the way. But the range of colors in the spectrum that we're covering is 40% of the spectrum. So let's narrow that down. And as we do, you can see the blue return because that's further away from red. And as we get closer and closer, the orange will come back. If we go too far, the red disappears. So we're getting pretty good with that. The mask is completely white over the red. It's completely black over everywhere else except the orange, because orange is very close in the spectrum. So how do we tweak that? First of all, let me invert this for a second, and you can see that the red's showing through pretty well, but not at 100%. So one of the things we can do is use the adjustment tool, and I'm going to start doing that now to show you what happens when you click on these cogs, these gears, say adjust. There's a feathering tool, again useful, especially with edge awareness turned on versus off, to allow your mask to not go hard against the edges of your subject so that you can feather some of the texture or whatever you're trying to do onto your subject and harmonize it a little better, make it a little prettier and able to blend in with the background more smoothly, more harmoniously. But we can take the contrast and slide it up, and now you can see that as I get the black of the black mask to be more dense, that the red is 100% back to what we had. And we can also play with the density, and that's going to help us get rid of that orange. And We may have to do this a couple of times. Come back to here, click adjust again, and again bring that contrast up. And now I've got that red circle selected by using the color selection tool here. Looks like a little artist's painter's palette here. That's the one we're going to use to select a color. So let's do that again. We're going to invert, and maybe this time we'll do blue. So click on the color masking tool, mask by color selection, click on the blue, and you can see it's a little further away from red and orange. It's very nicely selected, but it's also selected this box. If we turn off the mask, on the mask, let's see. Let's invert it for a second. You can see that's a white box. Not quite sure why it spilled over into that, maybe because we have these shapes overlapping. But let's see what we can do to refine that. So apparently the white is too close to blue in that area. Let's go back to masking it this way. I don't know, because we have white here as well. So let's see what happens if we reset that, invert, and go to color selection. It's kind of auto-selecting where it wanted instead of letting me select it. Again, I'm hoping that it's less finicky in the newer version. So as we increase the range, you can see that it's spilling over onto all the colors. As we decrease the range, it should be pretty specific to the blue. And indeed, it's helped turn its not so smart selection of that white box. And then I can go into my adjustments, affect the contrast and density of that mask, and we'll check the invert as well. Looking pretty close. I have to tweak the adjustment again. And there, now I just have a mask for my blue oval. So that's the color adjustment tool. Don't forget that when you use it, that there's a range setting as well as hue saturation. And that's an important thing, is that if I reset this, invert the mask, I can bring up my color selection tool, and instead of using the eyedropper, I can say, you know what, I want to select orange just by going to take the slider over to the orange and adjusting the range. It's doing a fairly good job of selecting the red instead of the orange. So let's slide it over a little bit. See if we can get it to be better about selecting the orange. And there it goes. It's pretty well just selected the orange. That's with the range set tightly down towards 0. It doesn't go all the way to 0, but it goes to 1. And as we bring the range up, it's covering more of the spectrum until it covers the entire spectrum. So don't forget, instead of using the eyedropper tool, you can just come down here and use the slider to select which color and the range.